Today I'm going to be taking a look at the RGB 10 made by Powkiddy. It's an open source Linux emulation handheld, and my experience in the past with Powkiddy have been mainly positive. Will the RGB 10 keep that trend going? Let's find out. Inside the box you have the RGB 10 itself, a USB Type-C cable for charging and data transfer, and a set of instructions. Taking a closer look at the console itself, you have 4 face buttons: start and select, a D-pad, and an analog stick that looks very much like the kind that are on the Nintendo Switch Joy-Cons. You also have these 2 buttons on the left and right side of the screen that have different functions depending on what game you're playing. You can also program them for different uses. Over on the top of the handheld you have the power button, the micro SD card slot, a USB Type-C port for charging, a headphone jack, and a Wi-Fi on-off switch. The Wi-Fi can be used to download system updates, patches, and even scrape added games for box art and menu effects. It's got a 3.5-inch IPS display, an RK3326 CPU, 1GB of RAM, and has a 3000 mAh battery that, depending on how resource heavy the game you're playing is, can give you up to 8 hours of playtime. Looking at this thing, it almost looks like a mini blocky Switch Lite. I'm not sure if that's the aesthetic they were going for, but once I turn this thing on, it seems like that's exactly the aesthetic they were going for. The menu theme looks almost identical to the Switch. It even makes the same noises as the Nintendo Switch. Combined, it has a total of over 20,000 games, and has everything ranging from NES to the Sega Dreamcast. I like to test these things out starting with their most resource heavy emulators. We pretty much know that they can run the 8-bit and 16-bit games relatively easily. Most of these consoles can, but I noticed this one had PSP titles installed. Not very many, but a few really good ones. The ones I played ran good. I was actually really surprised to see Crisis Core on here. I was even more surprised to see how well it ran on here. Maybe sometime in the future I'll add a few more PSP titles and kind of push this thing's limits, see what it's really capable of playing. Switching over to the Sega Dreamcast, it has some of the best games that this console has to offer, and performance-wise ran them really well. Although while going down my list of games to try, I did begin encountering problems while playing Dead or Alive. There was quite a bit of slowdown, and the hit detection seemed to be slightly off as well. I tried tweaking some settings to see if I could get it to work better, but any improvements were barely noticeable. It just doesn't run this game well. When it came to Nintendo 64, I have no idea what the hell is going on. None of these games ran good. It's got quite an extensive library of Nintendo 64 games, and they all ran like trash. I tried tweaking some settings like I did with the Dreamcast, but nothing seemed to work. I find it hard to believe that this console can run PSP games really well but struggles with N64. I don't know what I'm missing here, but some of these N64 games were just downright unplayable in their current states. Fortunately, some of the best N64 games were ported over to the DS, and the DS emulation on this device runs really good. The few games I played ran smooth, and the analog stick is already mapped to be the touchscreen. Its arcade emulation worked like a champ. Every arcade game I played ran about as good as you would expect it to. Same with all the games from the 16-bit era, none of them seem to have any issues performance-wise. So the RGB 10 by Powkiddy. Despite my issues with the N64 emulation, this is still a really solid handheld. I was very impressed at the way it handled PSP and Sega Dreamcast, and everything else with the exception of N64 ran really good. I feel like when it comes to these retro emulation handhelds, you're never going to find one that's perfect and does everything. It's a matter of finding that sweet spot of what works for you. I know for me personally, what makes this console stand out is its library of handheld titles. Everything from Game Boy, Game Boy Advance, Nintendo DS, Neo Geo Pocket, and even its limited PSP library makes this thing almost the go-to for retro handheld games. Couple that with the fact that it can play some Dreamcast games, and that makes it a pretty badass console. If you guys are interested in the RGB 10S by Powkiddy, I'll put links in the description below. Until next time, this is Ness, signing out.